So the next ball I want you to make, or material, is using this texture. And when thinking about this, you have to think about, you have basically 3 different materials here. You have the metal, has some scratches, some dirt on it, and then the rust, and then the paint. And thinking it as 3 different things that you have to apply, so let's create a ball. I think I'll just have to create a new one. Sphere. Get up here. And I'm gonna render, or do this render here. I select it, right click. Remember, we want to use the standard surface material. And then we'll name this rusty painted ball or something like that. Rusty painted metal. MTL. This is something descriptive. Use the camel case or snake case to name your stuff. Now, when we're doing this, we have to think about how these things are going to be applied. So, for instance, when we look at this, we want this to be metal. And usually metal is all the way on or all the way off. So that means we need a map that will be white for one, and black, and it's not metal. So in Photoshop, and you guys should have access to Photoshop, and I want you to do this. This map here is given to you in the material stuff folder. Is you basically take this, I'm gonna duplicate it by dragging it down here. So I always want to have one of these so I don't lose that, because we're going to use this map over and over to create different maps. So I want my metal to be white, because I want the metallic, or the metalness parameter to be on, and everything else to be off. So I can do that by using the paint bucket. And this tolerance level here is how much it's going to be filling in. And I would turn on all layers and turn off contiguous. And then I'm going to fill, and that's the wrong color. I want that to be white, right? So now I'm just going to switch that color over here. You can do that, or you can flip them like that. I want the metal to be on, so I'm just going to color fill that. So that means in that map, that's going to be on. Then I'm going to make another layer, and I'm going to color fill. I want everything else to be black, so I could just fill in everything. I don't need to look at all layers. Let's turn that off. Oops. 1 second. Actually, I want to make a new layer for this, then color fill. So I want that to be white. Make sure all layers is on, so it takes into the color on the background. And then I'm going to make another layer, make the background black like that. I could just turn this off because I don't want this, and I want something like this, right? So everything that's metal is white, everything else is black. And sometimes this won't get exactly what you want, so you might want to just like paint out areas that where it's metal that you don't want it to be. Like sometimes this number, or this right here, is getting too white on the edge. And so what I can do is go to that layer and just paint it out in those areas. Or you can play with the setting when you do the fill. Play with the tolerance level here. So I could set that to 30, and that will be less tolerant. So I'll make a new layer here. Color pick. Oh. need to make that white. Do all layers, so it's looking through all my layers. There, and that's a little bit better, right? So now I have this map. I can group these by using the folder option here, and name this metal. And I did this for each one of these. So this was the metal before. The next one is bump. So when we're thinking about bump, the lowest we want to think, when we look at this map here, the metal is the lowest thing, then the rust is on top of that, and then on top of that is the paint. So if you think of it in these different layers, then you can be thinking, okay, this should be the darkest. My value of where I don't want it to really move that much would probably be the rust. That would be around 0.5. And above 0.5 should be the paint. So I'm gonna do that same thing where I'm gonna make a new layer, and instead of, I want this to be darkest, so I'm gonna make that black, color pick that. So that means the metal's darker. And I would just make a layers like this, so that would be the metal. I could name this so it's not confusing, metal. And then the rust, I can do like a 0.5 for that. Color pick that, so there's that. And you can even, sometimes it doesn't get everything, so you can pick colors like that, just add more to it. And then I'm going to do the paint. I'm gonna add another layer, so that would be rust here. And this would be paint. And I'm gonna do something like 0.7 or 74%, something like that. And I'm just gonna color pick all this, all the blue basically. So I have all these 3 layers. Right now it's very flat, so a good trick is to duplicate your layer here. And we want to desaturate that. The hotkey that I use is Control U. So that goes to hue saturation. And I bring this saturation all the way to 0. That. And then for each one of these, I turn on metal and turn on all these. What we can do is have these blend into this black and white map. And so we can try like overlay would probably be my first option I would look at it. And the benefit of this is then you get variation. Like you get all these like details where it scratches, it's gonna be a little rougher. There's gonna be a little bit of that texture of the metal where it goes in and out and roughness and shininess. Or this would be the bump, so it would be bumping out a little bit. And then I'll go on to the rust and do that same thing. I'll do like, you don't have to do overlay, just pick something that looks good to you and then apply it and see, and then you can adjust it afterwards. But see that, there's the rust, and I get all these little bumps on it. And I'll do that same thing for the paint. So I'm gonna overlay that. And then I get this kind of map. This might seem a little dark, or like it's pushing in too much. So then I can even go to that metal, bring down the opacity, so it's a little bit less contrasty, where it's pushing in too much. So I have that, and that would be my bump. So I'm gonna group all that, Control G to group. I'll name that bump. So now we did metal. That will turn on the metalness parameter on the white there, and everything out, it will turn it off for everything else. The bump will push down where the metal is. The bump will be around a little bit higher, and then the paint will be on higher above that. So you have to think of it like heights. So we have 2 right now. Now for the roughness, which is probably the hardest one. It'll look like this. And the reason why it's like this, you have to think about what's shiny and what's not shiny. So the least shiny thing on here, what do you guys think? Rust. So that should be, when we look at our parameter in here, a roughness of 1 is white, right? So if I changing, hold on. Oh, I was on the wrong one, sorry. So roughness of 1 is rough, roughness of 0 is shiny. So it means black would be shiny, white would be rough. So each one of these parameters is a little, you just have to think about that idea, and then if I set this at 0.5, I get a mix. So one way you could do this is like, I want my metal to be about this shiny. Then the value should overall be 0.3. So then I can go into here and do that same kind of thing. I'm going to add another layer and set my value here to 30 and color, and then just fill that in. So that would be the metal. And then my roughness, we could do that same thing and be like, okay, I want my roughness to be at about 0.8. Say that's about the roughness I want. Then you just go to Photoshop, put 80%. Add another layer, and then fill that in. Might need to color pick it a few times. So there's different colors in there of the rust, more red or orange. So that would be the roughness. And then my paint, I want to be less rough than my rust. So I'm gonna probably want it down here. Like I kind of want it shiny. You can turn off the metalness to see what it looks like. Maybe I want it at like 0.5. And you can even like change the color to being close if you're having a hard time figuring out the general roughness. Maybe I want it, well, I think maybe 0.3 would be better. So then I'm going to, so this was the rust, add another layer. And we said 30% or 0.3. And so I'm going to color pick that. Just pick all the colored, the blue color out of there. Just be careful because it looked like, oh, I'm going to turn off these just to make sure I didn't color pick the metal. Okay, so I have these 3 different layers. Maybe this needs to be darker now because that 0.3 metal is similar to my roughness of my paint. It's about similar, pretty similar. So I'm going to make that a little bit shinier by hitting Control L. So Control U and Control L are probably the most used hotkeys for this. Control L is levels, and that's a way that we can darken things. So I want my metal to be a little bit darker, so that means a little bit shinier. And then I'll bring back my rust. So now we do that same thing where we want all those like undulation and details of our original map. So I'm going to duplicate this color and desaturate it. And then I can go to my metal and I can overlay that. So that means that it'll be a little bit shinier on the edges, more rougher here, rougher where that scratch is. So that makes sense, right? So the darker, shinier, lighter is rougher. Then I'll go to my rust, do that same kind of thing. Go to my rust, overlay it. So then I get areas where it's a little bit rougher and a little bit shinier when I do that. And so you want that kind of realistic variation that happens. I'll do that same thing for the paint. I'll overlay that like this. And so I have areas where it's, you know, you get that variation that in real life you would see. So I'm going to group all that, name that roughness. So now we've done all 3 of our maps. I'll delete my original ones. All 4 maps, because we want color. So we have color, we have roughness, we have bump, and we have metal. So now it's just exporting out and plugging in it. So I'm just going to go File. I usually do save as copy. Some people go to save export, quick export as PNG. Either way is fine. And then remember where we put our textures? Source images, yay. And what should you do before you start working? Set your project, thank you. Okay, so I'm gonna go to my class demos and my project and put it in my source images. And you kind of want to name these, so I did color underscore painted metal. So that's the channel, and then that's the material. Something like that. Something where it's organized. Then I'll click on my roughness, do that same kind of thing. Export as PNG. And then I'll just change the color for this one. This was the roughness. So I'll just do rough underscore painted metal. And then I'll do that same thing for the bump. And put bump instead of color. And then I'll do metal. Like that. Now, it's just plugging it into our material here. So we have this material. I'm just gonna go to my Hypershade. I've selected in here the material, or so I can go right click and say graph materials on viewport selection. Just right click the background, or you can find it up here and graph it that way. Just have to find the name. Named it rusted metal, so I could go graph material and I'll pop it up like that. So first thing, I probably put the color in. So I'll just go to that checkerboard, go to File, and navigate to where I saved it. So that was color. So color.png, open. Then go back to here. So the next one be metalness. While you're working, I would probably turn off your renderer because that can freeze up your stuff and might break your render or break your Maya. So just turn it off. And then so we want to do metalness, so that same kind of thing. So click the checkerboard, File, navigate where that metal is. So it'll be M, metal, painted metal. And you guys remember what you should do for black and white masks or black and white textures? What's the little parameter if it doesn't work that you need to check on?
Alpha.
Yep. Yep. So under color balance, alpha is luminance. So click that. Then I'll just click that on if I don't see it. You can do test renders and just check it out. Just see if that's working. So that is turning metal down there. I can rotate this if I can't see it. Like, okay, yeah, the metalness is working on that spot, right? And everything else is turned off. Remember to turn it off while you're doing this. The next thing is roughness. So I'm gonna do that same thing, checkerboard, File, and then go to my image name and search rough painted metal, hit open. And then it's a black and white map, so I'll just click Alpha's Luminance and then look at that, see if that's working. Now I can move around to see what the highlights look like, and that's looking a little shiny overall. I'm going to turn off Alpha's Luminance and see what that happens for that. So that looks like, so it turns everything too rough, so it does need that Alpha's Luminance. But you can test it out and be like, oh, it is more rough there, that's really shiny, and then you can go back to your mask and either lighten it up then in those areas where you think it's too shiny, or vice versa. You can adjust in the map. So we have that, and the last map was bump. To get to bump, we go down to geometry, go to bump mapping, click on that, go to file, and then I'm going to go and plug in that map that we did. So that would be bump painted metal, so it looks like that. And we can take a look at it. Usually it's too heavy of a bump. Oops, let me turn that off. There it goes. Yeah, the bump is way too heavy by default, so we need to reduce it. So I'll just turn that off for now. Usually I go to the bump 2D node and set the bump depth to a really small number like 0.01. And then render it out and see what it looks like. So I have that. So I'd say everything looks pretty good except for everything looks a little too shiny, right? So what you can do, like you could go back into Photoshop and go to your roughness and go through and hit Control L and lighten it up overall. You can do each one of those and have a lot of control in Photoshop to make things more rough. But remember, we also have the AI color correct. So you can do that in Maya. You won't have as much control, but then I can just go AI color correct. And this is the roughness, so that's going into the specular roughness. I'm going to put this color correct node. Remember it's green, so we need to expand that out, put it into R, and then do that same thing in here. So I need to expand that out, put it R here. And so I can go and dial this in using this node. So maybe I need, so you have to think about, okay, black is shinier and white is rough. So I need to bring up, and right now it's too shiny. So then I would just bring up the gamma, that will lighten it up. I can also add, use the add thing here. So I do that because that's more of a overall kind of roughness. And that's getting closer to what I want. Okay? Any questions about that? Super clear? Okay. I'll save this video. And yeah, the rest of the time is just a work day. So let me and Noah if you have any questions. Yeah.